We'll start with looking at this idea of cookie consent and having tracking technologies on your website. I would say even the use of the word cookies sometimes can be a little misleading because it ends up being a shorthand for all the different tracking technologies that you can have on your website, even though cookies are really a specific individual form. So we have to be kind of careful in your privacy policies, in your public disclosures, in your cookie policy, etc., in defining what you mean by that. And if you mean cookie as a shorthand for pixels, SDKs, tags, JavaScript, local storage, things like that, then you should define it that way and put in a parenthetical in quotes, cookie capital C, because you've defined that term as including these other technologies. Whereas if you use a lowercase c and you mean it to refer to all of those, it may not. And you could actually end up making deceptive statements on that basis because you're using a term that means one thing, but you mean to apply it to others, and it just gets confusing. So, areas of common concern involving cookie consent or tracking consent. Number one, I would say miscategorization of cookies trackers in a consent management platform. So, we talked about, for instance, under the European regime, everything aside from cookies that are essential or strictly necessary for a website to operate, generally speaking, will require opt-in consent. And there are some exceptions to that on the margins. France actually is the CNIL, the French CNIL, the privacy regulator there is a little more forward-thinking in terms of like, well, do first-party analytics cookies really require consent? They kind of still do, but it's a much lesser standard. And I think they've sort of signaled that we're not going to go after companies for something like that. It's more other bigger areas. And so, but where you see miscategorization, so like, if my point is that if you put everything in strictly necessary, if you put advertising cookies in a strictly necessary cookie bucket, obviously you're cruising for a bruising, as my father used to say to me. Never actually, no bruising, but just to get me to get my attention to say, look, this is you're going to eventually have a problem here if that's your practice, is to say, well, we'll just call everything strictly necessary, or as you sometimes see, we will take third-party cookies provided by a different company, and we'll call them first party. We'll just say they're first party, even though they're set from a different domain. We're going to treat them as first party cookies, and therefore, normal consent tools may not apply to them because it's a first party cookie, not sharing with a third party, even though, or you may even change it so that it's set from your domain, but the information is going to a third party for analytics purposes, for instance. And then that analytics might be connected to the advertising tool offered by that same vendor. And so it gets, a little trickier there. So I guess the takeaway here is be very careful when you work with a company like TrustArc, to do an inventory of the tracking technologies on your website. Be very careful and narrow, I guess, in the don't be too expansive in how you view where a cookie or a tracker might fit. You have to kind of be intellectually honest about it, document it, understand with the product and marketing and legal teams, what exactly is this vendor doing for us? What information exactly are they going to be collecting and using in order to perform their services, or any sort of secondary uses they're going to make with it? Is it going out into the real-time advertising, real-time bidding advertising ecosystem? That would be relevant to know, because that goes to whether it's advertising or tracking technology cookie. So main thing there is knowing what's on your website or in your mobile application, and then putting them in the right buckets, whether it's functional, analytics, strictly necessary, advertising, etc.